Bolts of lightning, pouring rain, crescent moon has taken itself far away to lay down. One more lazy dream. I can't sleep. They used to cut. Now you and me, we was thicker than blood, but the sky grew dark and got inside of me. I still hear the words you told me, baby, gonna be so lonely.
So we're coming into the palm garden, and this is like mostly the collection. We have over 400 species of palms, demonstrating really good palms for the Central Florida area. And there's a lot of species that do well here that aren't widely grown and should be. And then the other ones we're trying for cold tolerance to see this in Central Florida, how well they'll survive the cold. And then it's fine to say, but there are some palms we do try for heat tolerance too. There are some palms that grow in cool subtropical regions that might not get real cold in the winter, but they don't get hot either. And there's some groups, like there's palms from New Zealand, shaving brush palms, that won't grow well here because of the heat. They won't tolerate really below like 25, 26 degrees, but they don't like and it's not so much our heat in the day, but it's the heat at night, because in the, like for 6 months here, it doesn't get below 70 degrees at night. And a lot of plants, like at night, they rest, and when it's hot at night like that, a lot of plants don't shut down, like temperate plants. They can, and it wears them out. And it makes them more prone to fungus, which we have a lot because of our humid, wet climate. We get rain almost every day in the summer, and then it's hot and humid. And then one section in the palm garden is the cycad garden. And cycads look like palms, but they're not related at all. They're actually a type of gymnosperm, and they're most closely related to, they evolved from the ferns. So they're more closely related to ferns and ginkgos and conifers than they are to palms. Cycads evolved and came around in the fossil record in the Jurassic. So by the Cretaceous period, they were really widespread. And today there's about 300 species of cycads, and many of them are threatened or endangered. A lot of them are very slow to reproduce, small habitat distribution, and then they either habitat destruction or they're valuable for landscape plants, so they've been poached. And a lot of them are real easy to transplant. So it's good for the gardener, but it's also bad for their survival because they're easy to
That's so sad to
strip
hear
them out of the
that.
wild.
Wow.
And so they're sexed plants, either male or female, and they produce cones. So the males have a more slender cone that produces the pollen, and then females had the larger cones and a lot of them that like resemble pine cones, and you can see the gymnosperm aspect of the plant.
Okay.
And there's one native in Florida, the Kunti, which is a low growing one. It doesn't get a trunk, but some of them will get trunks 10 to 20 feet tall. And many are very slow growing. It could take them hundreds of years to get to their maximum height.
Man, so this is a cycad too.
And that was a real prickly one.
Holly, yeah, right. Holly leaf. Anything with the name Holly, I'm gonna avoid. But
yeah, it's got spines on the leaflets, and then down the leaf stem, it would have some big spines on it too.
yeah, just wake anybody up if they're walking a little bit too far off the path.
And that's a neat one because the females, this one hasn't coned yet. Sometimes it can take a couple decades before you know if they're male or female before they start to cone. But the females of these will produce a big round cone, and they're bright red, and it often produces at Christmas time. So you have this bright red cone with the dark green holly-shaped leaves on it.
Perfect. I see some crazy things hanging down from this tree.
That is the African sausage tree, native to a widespread area of tropical Africa, and it kind of grows at the transition of the tropical rainforest into the savanna and drier regions. And those are the seed pods that look like large sausages. So in the summer, it produces on those stalks a maroon flower that opens at night. And in habitat in Africa, they're pollinated by bats. Well, we don't have pollinating bats here, but we have moths that'll pollinate them. And so it produces those large fruit. Now they're not edible, they're not poisonous, but they're just very dry and spongy.
Oh,
But in Africa, a lot of animals will eat those baboons, birds, giraffes, and elephants. Once they drop off the tree, will eat them.
oh.
And it's one of those, they have a large seed that when these large herbivores eat it, they pretty much usually swallow the seed whole, and then it gets deposited later in a big pile of fertilizer.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. And that sausage tree is a remnant of Mr. Liu. That would have been planted, one of his specimens.
Okay.
And it's a tropical one, but it survived all those big freezes and it's grown back. It was damaged really bad, but now it's a very large specimen.
And is this the native, it's like disappearing fern growing on there?
Resurrection fern, the native.
Resurrection fern,
Yeah, that's a neat one. It curls up after, if it hasn't rained for a few days, it curls up and it looks dry, but then as soon as you get a rain within an hour, it's uncurled and it'll be lush and green for a few days.
So did that plant itself there?
Yeah, they're epiphytic, and the spore will just float in the air and attach to the tree and then sprout. And all it does is adhere to the tree, it doesn't harm it at all.
Nice.
So, and in the cycad garden too, to make it a little bit more interesting, a lot of people, you say a cycad garden and that's like, if you don't know what it is, it's kind of yawn. But so like when they have school groups coming through, it's a prehistoric garden. So interspaced with the cycads, we've planted prehistoric plants. So kind of like focus on plants that would have been around in the Cretaceous period at the height of the dinosaurs. So there's tree ferns, there's a ginkgo tree, there's a Don redwood back in there, some lower ferns, some horsetails, and then a few palms, because the palms came around in the Cretaceous period. They weren't widespread, but there were some palms in there, and then pandans, also known as screw pines, a tropical plant that kind of palm-like.
And then the purple flowering tree?
Now that is Hong Kong orchid tree, and it's a really good flowering tree here. It's a sterile hybrid between two purple orchid tree species, and both of the parents are common in Central and South Florida, but the parents, the two species, produce a large amount of seed, and they can be a little weedy and messy. It hybridized, and it was first discovered in Hong Kong. And so it takes the one parent flowers in the fall and winter, and the other parent flowers late winter and spring. So it does not produce the messy seeds, but it also flowers a long time from fall through spring, and then sometimes it can have some sporadic flowers in the summer.
Okay.
And that's a good tree too, because if you get up close, the flowers are fragrant, and it's a big hummingbird attractor. So in South Florida, you get a lot of hummingbirds that go down for the winter that migrate, and these are in yards, and it's a great tree to attract hummingbirds.
And a fast grower?
Fast growing, yeah.
Yeah, sounds like a great tree.
We've really promoted it, and the nursery trade has kind of responded to people because they put the two parents are on the invasive plant list. They're not prohibited, but it's recommended not to plant them. If this was one of the invasive species, when in the spring, after the seed pods formed, you might have thousands of seedlings growing underneath it. So, and all these big brown bean-looking pods too. So. Once it's planted, it doesn't need a lot of care. It's fairly drought tolerant. But
And I guess it's not deciduous?
it'll go partially deciduous. If we had a colder winter, it might drop the leaves, but in the spring, it usually holds the majority of the foliage. And then in the spring, when the new growth wants to start, then it sheds all the foliage and it leaves right out, so it's not bare real long.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's one of those things. It'd be so cool to see more of these things, you know, on these seas of lawn that people have.
Yeah. And like I said, we have the bamboos in here. So here's one of them, striped bamboo. It's a type of timber bamboo. And the normal species has green canes. And this is a variety called Vittata, which has golden canes with green striping.
Wow.
And these old canes, that's just algae and lichens growing on it just from the humid climate. So, but you can see the newer ones before they get covered.
Yeah, beautiful. You have it surrounded by concrete. Is that for a reason?
No, most of our bamboos, other than a couple, are clumpers. We don't plant the running ones because those are more temperate bamboos, and some of them won't grow here, but also just because of we don't want to promote that.
Okay.
But these are clumpers. Now, clumpers still can spread out. They're clumpers because when the new canes come out, they come out within a few inches to maybe a foot, whereas running bamboos, those new canes can come up, 30, 40 feet away.
Yeah.
So they're easier to control. But we just had an open circle here, and that would be a good centerpiece to put this striped bamboo.
And you haven't had any kind of like lumps in the concrete, I guess?
No, usually bamboo is not real destructive like that.
Okay.
So far we haven't had it. That's why we were watching it, because it's been in here about 30 years now.
Yeah, what a great habitat there for little critters and birds and It's good to know that, the bamboos that you see at the Lou Gardens are something that you could, try in your own garden.
Yeah, and most of them that they sell in the nursery trade now, it's like really in the last 20 years they've gotten educated and selling appropriate, because people would buy bamboo, plant it, and then 3 years later they're like, what the heck's going on? And their neighbors have it. And
that's why HOAs were formed.
Yeah. Even if they're a clumper, some of the bamboos just get too big for an average yard, because some of these bamboos can get 60, 80 feet tall. So there's, like a bamboo of any size that you need for your landscape that you can find. So there's a lot of size appropriate ones now too. This road right here, this is the original driveway. It comes off Nebraska Avenue, the gate way down at the end.
Okay.
And these are, like I was saying, these are camphor trees. And these are old specimens, probably planted around 1895. And so they're historic. We've left them. And you can see the berries they're shedding berries right now. But this is where if camphor oil comes from. They use medicinally. So like camphor-phenique, that real strong, comes from the bark of the tree.
Oh, okay.
And they're close related to cinnamon trees. And camphors are native to southern Japan, southern China. Oh. Very long lived. There's trees in China and Japan at temples that are like over 1,000 years old. But they can live for hundreds of years. Very strong. When we've had the hurricanes, minimal damage. They shed green twigs and that's it. But they've evolved in areas that have typhoons, so they're pretty indestructible.
And then this clump of bamboo is insane. I mean, it's almost like more mass than the camphor tree.
Yeah, and that's formed. It's a very dense growing one. It's sea breeze bamboo from southern China, and it's a clumper, but it's been in the ground about 25 years. So you see, if it hasn't been controlled at all. We've let it grow. They eventually can spread out, but it doesn't happen within a few years. Yeah. You've got time to keep it manage it.
I love when bamboos create, a little room on the inside, and that's probably a lot of people managing it to do that, huh?
Yeah. Now the one in that circle would be more open if it was out by its own. So it would be more open, but then there's some like that one that's it naturally. It grows real dense and you couldn't really get into it unless you thinned it out a little bit. So this is the old house, and this front section with the peak part of the roof was built in 1888. And it's open certain times of the day for tours, and the Lou's were the last ones to live in it. And so not everything in there was Lou's furnishing, but it's period appropriate. But there is still a lot of furniture and pieces that were the Lou's.
And a giant camellia.
Yeah, there's one left, and it's right outside Mr. Lou's office. He had an office in the house, and that was that room. There used to be old laurel oaks around the house, and we've lost them all in the hurricanes. It used to be shadier, and there were other camellias that we lost because it got too sunny, and we planted a live oak back. But that big old camellia has been fine. We've been watching it because we're like, that's one of the biggest camellias, and it was outside Minnesota. We'd hate to lose it. And you can't move them. They don't transplant at that size.
And it's not something you'd refresh, right?
Yeah, and it just, we just have to accept if it was going to die. But it's been doing well, and now it's starting to get a little bit more shaded from some of the other trees around it. So hopefully it's here for another 50 years.
And then are these giant crepe myrtles, these two?
These two right here, yeah. They're Muskogee variety, which is one of the bigger ones.
Yeah.
They get a lavender pink flower in the summer.
Okay. And I see a lot of crepe myrtles around town where they're just kind of like they've been hacked away at the top. That's
the worst thing you can do to them.
Yeah.
There's less and less doing it, but everyone thought you had to do it. And the reason they said it made it flower better, and it doesn't. That it would flower. And what it does is if you constantly do that, you're ruining the structure integrity of it. And they branch so thick at the top, they're not pollarding it. Like if you were pollarding it, you're doing it the right way. But they don't go and thin that growth out. And so you get all that growth and it can split. Like in a storm, there's so much, like if you growth on it. So yeah, so you're seeing less and less of it, but there's still some people doing it. Yeah. Okay. And a lot of times people do it because they said, well, it got too big. It was like, well, you planted the wrong crepe myrtle, because there's no excuse. There's a crepe myrtle of every size. So if you need something that only gets 10 foot and you bought one that gets 30 foot, you could have bought one that only gets 10 foot. That would have been appropriate and you didn't have to cut it back.
Okay.
So that's another one we try to educate. But it's getting better, and the nurseries are educating people, because before I don't know what it is. I don't know how big it gets,
Yeah.
So people would buy this crepe myrtle,
Yeah.
think it's only going to get 8 or 10 feet tall, and next thing you know, they have a 20-foot, and it's growing into the eaves or under the wires or so, you know, and you got to hack it back.
So you have quite a big collection of crepe myrtles as well.
Yeah, we've got a section with a lot of different varieties, and there's so many new varieties coming out
cool.
each year, you just can't keep up with them. But
I
we've
just
got
love
quite a few.
the bark so much.
They're good. It's probably one of the most common plants, like in Central Florida, North Florida.
Okay.
Sometimes maybe overused, some of the varieties.
Oh yeah. I love the ground cover down there too. What is that?
That is mondo grass.
Nice. That's
It's
really great.
not a
Grows
true
well,
grass.
or- Yeah.
It's in the asparagus family, lily family, the old lily family. But yeah, it's a good ground cover for shade. It's just green. Gets a real little insignificant flower, but can be used for borders.
And so thick. That's great.
Yeah, and that's as tall as it gets. And there's a dwarf variety of it. And this is the Idea Garden. We put this in about 20 years ago, and there's smaller themed gardens in here.
Oh, okay.
Like people could replicate at home. So there's a bird garden, there's an evening garden, there's a fragrance garden. They had an enabling garden, so for people that were disabled, because we used to have a horticulture therapy program for a while. So it would be easily accessible to people that were disabled or in wheelchairs. So like raised planter beds, or you could get a wheelchair up underneath it or so.
That's
So
such a cool thing. Well, it just seems like there's, eons of time and hours you could spend enjoying this garden, and I'm happy to be able to share a little bit of it, with people on the internet. But it seems like they got to come here to really get.
Yeah, there's a lot here. It's a very detailed, a lot of plants in here.
yeah, and a lot of knowledge to take away to your own gardens here in Florida or in surrounding areas too.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. Thanks
over
for
the
coming.
fence. And, yeah,
All
really
right.
appreciate it.
Hope you enjoy your visit, and thanks for coming.
Yeah.
For featuring us.